The rain was cold that night, the kind that seeps through fabric and settles into bone. Daniel Cole sat on a flattened cardboard box outside the Hartwell building, his beard fake, his coat borrowed from a costume shop, his hands wrapped in fingerless gloves that smelled like dust and mothballs. He wasn't homeless. He was about to become a dead man walking, and he didn't even know it yet. 15 feet away, under the golden awning of Le Chevalier restaurant, his fiancée Vanessa Price sat across from a man in a charcoal suit, swirling red wine in a glass that cost more than the coat on Daniel's back. "He won't live long enough to sign the papers," she said, laughing softly, like she'd just told a joke about the weather. Daniel's stomach dropped through the pavement, because the he she was talking about was him. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel Cole believed his life was, for the first time in 34 years, complete. He'd built Coldwell Structural Group, from a 2-desk office above a laundromat into one of the most respected engineering firms on the East Coast. He didn't do it with charm or connections. He did it with 16-hour days, a stubborn refusal to cut corners, and a memory for every promise he ever made to a client. His late father, Arthur Cole, used to say, "Son, money doesn't change a man. It just hands him a microphone so everyone can hear what he already was." Daniel had tried to live by that. He still drove the same silver truck he bought at 26. He still tipped the bagel guy on 5th an extra $1 every morning. He still called his mother every Sunday at exactly p.m. because that's when his father used to call her from job sites, back before the heart attack took him at 59. And then there was Vanessa. She'd walked into his life at a charity gala 18 months ago, wearing an emerald dress and an easy laugh. And within an hour, Daniel had found himself telling her things he hadn't told anyone about his father, about the crushing loneliness of being the guy everyone needed something from, about how he sometimes wondered if anyone would love him if the company disappeared tomorrow. "I would," she'd said, looking him dead in the eye. "I don't care about Coldwell. I care about you." He believed her. God help him. He believed her completely. 6 months later, he proposed on the rooftop of the building his father broke ground on 40 years earlier. She cried. He cried. His mother cried harder than both of them combined, clutching a photo of Arthur like she was showing him. The wedding was set for 6 weeks away. 200 guests. A church his grandmother had been baptized in. Daniel had never felt so certain of anything, which is exactly why what happened next nearly destroyed him. It started small, the way most betrayals do. A phone that buzzed and was quickly turned face down. A girl's trip to Miami that Vanessa's actual best friend, Priya, knew nothing about. A new financial advisor Vanessa insisted Daniel meet a slick, softly spoken man named Marcus Voss, who kept steering conversations toward Daniel's estate planning. "Just good practice," Marcus had said over dinner, smiling with teeth too white to be trusted. "Every successful man should have his affairs in order before marriage. Simplifies things. Protects everyone." Daniel, trusting to a fault, had shrugged it off. Successful men attracted people who wanted a piece of them. He'd learned to live with the leeches. He never imagined the woman he loved might be holding the knife. The unraveling truly began on a Tuesday, when Daniel's longtime attorney and oldest friend, Walter Higgs, called him with unusual tension in his voice. "Daniel, I need you to come to my office, alone, today." Walter had drafted Daniel's father's will 15 years ago. He'd watched Daniel grow from an intern, who couldn't read a blueprint right side up, into a man who ran a 9-figure company. Walter didn't rattle easily. That afternoon, in a wood-paneled office that smelled like old paper and stronger coffee, Walter slid a folder across the desk. "Someone's been requesting information about your estate," Walter said. "Insurance riders, beneficiary structures, your buy-sell agreement at Coldwell." Someone with real legal knowledge, asking very specific, very pointed questions. "Who?" Walter hesitated. "The requests came through a paralegal at a firm Vanessa uses." Voss's firm. Daniel felt the floor tilt slightly. "The way it does right before you understand something you don't want to understand." "That doesn't mean anything," Daniel said, more to himself than to Walter. "She's planning our future, prenups, wills, that's normal before a wedding." Walter's eyes were kind, but his voice was iron. Daniel. Nobody needs to know the payout structure of your key man life insurance policy to plan a wedding. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He lay beside Vanessa, listening to her breathe evenly, peacefully, while his own heart hammered like a trapped bird. He watched the ceiling fan turn in slow circles and asked himself the question that would define the next month of his life. Do I trust the woman I'm about to marry? Or do I trust my gut? He decided on something almost absurd in its simplicity. He wouldn't hire a private investigator, not yet. Investigators could be bought. Information leaked, and if Vanessa was innocent, he'd never forgive himself for treating her like a suspect through some stranger's binoculars. Instead, he would look for the truth himself, with his own eyes. He remembered something his father used to say about job sites. You never see the real work happening until the crew forgets you're watching. Vanessa had mentioned, almost too casually, a standing business dinner every Thursday at Le Chevalier, always alone, always unexplained, always ending with her coming home a little too bright-eyed, a little too rehearsed in her description of boring investor talk. That Thursday, Daniel told Vanessa he had a site inspection in Albany and wouldn't be back until late. Instead, he drove to a costume supply shop 40 minutes outside the city, paid cash, and transformed himself in the back seat of his truck, a gray wig, a thrifted coat 3 sizes too big, a fake beard, dirt rubbed convincingly into the creases of his hands. He looked in the rearview mirror and didn't recognize himself, which was exactly the point. At 6:45 p.m., Daniel, now a nameless, invisible man, settled onto the sidewalk 15 feet from Le Chevalier's outdoor patio, a paper cup in front of him, his cap pulled low. New York City has a peculiar cruelty. It trains its residents to look everywhere except at the people struggling right in front of them. Daniel counted 43 people who walked past him in the first 20 minutes. Not one made eye contact. Vanessa was one of them. She swept past in a cream trench coat, phone pressed to her ear, laughing at something. She didn't glance down. Why would she? To her, he was furniture, static, a shape the city produced and discarded every day. She sat down at her usual table. 2 minutes late, Marcus Voss arrived, and Daniel, invisible, humiliated, terrified, listened. At first, it was almost boring. The mundane rhythm of 2 people, speaking in hushed, professional tones about numbers and dates. Daniel strained to catch fragments over the clatter of dishes and traffic. The policy triples once the marriage certificate is filed. The trust reverts to her as primary beneficiary the moment the ceremony. 6 weeks isn't fast enough. I need more time to move the shell accounts before anyone at Coldwell audits. Daniel's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes on the pavement, his hands trembling around the paper cup, forcing his breathing to stay slow and shallow, the posture of a man who had learned to disappear. Then Marcus said something that made Daniel's blood run to ice. You understand what we agreed to. The wedding happens, the policy activates, and within 90 days, he has an accident. Something mechanical. He's an engineer, for God's sake. Nobody questions an engineer dying near his own equipment. Vanessa didn't flinch. She sipped her wine. It has to look natural, she said. I'm not going to prison over this. It will, Marcus said. The brake line modification. I told you about the same failure mode. NHTSA logged 11 times last year. Never flagged as tampering. His truck, his job sites. No one bats an eye. Vanessa was quiet for a moment, and Daniel, pretending to sleep against a stone pillar, allowed himself, just once, to look up. Her face wasn't cruel. That was the part that broke something loose in his chest. She looked bored, like she was discussing renovation timelines. Not a man's death. Not his death. Fine, she said finally, but it needs to happen after the papers are signed. Everything transferred. I'm not doing this for nothing. Marcus raised his glass slightly, an ugly little toast. To timing, then. And then Vanessa said the line that would echo in Daniel's skull for the rest of his life. He won't live long enough to sign the papers anyway, not the way you're planning it. Might as well enjoy the wedding first. She laughed. A genuine, easy laugh. The same one that had first pulled him toward her at that rooftop gala. Daniel sat on the cold pavement, disguised as a ghost of himself, and understood with total, sickening clarity that the woman he loved had already killed him in every way that mattered, and was simply waiting on logistics. He didn't remember standing up. He didn't remember walking 6 blocks in the wrong direction before his hands stopped shaking enough to hail a cab. He gave the driver Walter's address instead of his own, because he understood, with the instinct of a drowning man reaching for driftwood, that he could not go home. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Not to that home. Not to that bed beside that woman. Walter opened the door in a bathrobe, blinking at the disheveled, bearded stranger on his porch, and then his eyes widened as he recognized the shape of his old friend beneath the disguise. Daniel? Good God! What happened to you? Daniel opened his mouth, and instead of words, something between a sob and a laugh came out. The sound of a man whose entire understanding of his life had just been surgically removed. Walter pulled him inside. For 2 hours, Daniel talked. He recounted every word, every syllable, every casual cruelty delivered over a $200 bottle of wine. Walter listened without interrupting, his old lawyer's face carefully still, though his knuckles had gone white around his coffee mug. When Daniel finished, Walter set the mug down with deliberate calm. "We're not calling the police tonight," he said. "What? Walter, she's planning to kill me. And right now, it's your word, a man in a beggar's disguise, against a socialite with a spotless reputation and a lawyer boyfriend who will have an alibi ready before you finish dialing 911. We have nothing. No recording. No documents. No witnesses who'll admit what they saw. If we move now, she destroys evidence, lawyers up, and you spend the next 2 years fighting a case you can't win, all while she waits you out." Daniel felt fury rise in his throat. "So I just what marry her? Let her?" "No," Walter said. "You disappear from her radar as the man who suspects anything. You become, for the next few weeks, the most oblivious, devoted fiancé in Manhattan. And behind the scenes, we build a case so airtight that even her lawyer's lawyer can't wriggle out of it." Daniel stared at the man who had been his father's friend before he was his own. "You want me to keep pretending to marry her?" Walter's expression didn't waver. "I want you to survive long enough to see her face when it all comes apart." The next morning, Daniel returned home. Vanessa was in the kitchen in one of his old college sweatshirts, humming as she poured coffee, looking every bit like the woman he'd fallen in love with. Golden morning light on her hair, a warmth in her eyes that, 12 hours ago, had felt like home, and now felt like a loaded weapon aimed at his chest. "You're back early," she said, smiling. "How was Albany?" "Long," he said, and it wasn't a lie. "Boring inspection." "I missed you." He crossed the kitchen and kissed her forehead, the hardest thing he'd ever done. Harder than any negotiation, any funeral, any job site collapse he'd had to explain to grieving families. Her hand rested against his chest, right over the heart she was planning to stop. "I missed you too," she whispered. Daniel smiled and felt something in himself go cold and still, like a lake freezing over in November, beautiful on the surface, deadly beneath. The performance had begun. Over the following days, Daniel and Walter assembled a small, silent team. A forensic accountant named Priya's husband, Rajesh, knew from law school. A retired NIPS detective named Sam Okafor, who owed Walter a favor from a case 20 years back, and a mechanic Daniel trusted with his life, literally, now named Big Eddie, who'd serviced Coldwell's fleet since before Daniel took over the company. "I need you to check my truck," Daniel told Eddie in the strained, careful voice of a man trying not to sound insane. "The brake lines." "Don't ask why yet." Eddie didn't ask. He simply pulled the truck into his bay that same afternoon, and 40 minutes later called Daniel with the voice gone tight and serious. "Somebody been under here, Danny. Recent work. Not mine. There's a modification on the primary line. A weak point that'll hold fine for weeks, maybe a couple months, and then fail catastrophic on a hard break. Downhill, maybe, or highway speed. You'd lose the whole system at once. No warning light. No time to react." Daniel closed his eyes, leaning against the cool metal of a support beam, and let the confirmation settle into his bones like a stone dropped into dark water. It was real, all of it. Sam Okafor, meanwhile, worked his old contacts to trace the money. What he found painted a picture more elaborate than Daniel had feared. Marcus Voss wasn't merely a financial advisor. He was under a state investigation for a nearly identical scheme 2 years earlier, involving a wealthy widow in Connecticut, whose husband had died in a freak boating accident for months after signing over his estate. The case had gone cold for lack of evidence. The widow, coincidentally, had married Marcus's business partner 8 months after the funeral and moved to Portugal. "This isn't his first rodeo," Sam said grimly, spreading photographs across Walter's conference table. "He finds women who are charming, cash-strapped, and willing. He teaches them the long game. Vanessa isn't the mastermind here, Daniel, but she's not innocent either. She's a willing student." Rayesh's forensic work turned up the final piece. A shell company registered in Delaware 3 months before Daniel's proposal, structured to receive the payout from a life insurance policy. Vanessa had quietly encouraged Daniel to increase, for peace of mind, shortly after their engagement, a policy worth $4.2 million, with Vanessa as sole beneficiary the moment they legally married. The wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was the final signature on Daniel's death warrant. There is a particular kind of grief reserved for mourning someone who is still alive, still sleeping beside you, still laughing at your jokes, still wearing the ring you gave her. Daniel found himself, in quiet moments, missing Vanessa even as he sat across from her, because the woman he loved had never really existed. He was grieving a person built entirely out of his own hope. 10 days before the wedding, Daniel nearly broke. He was reviewing site blueprints late one night when Vanessa came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders, resting her chin against his neck the exact way she always had. "You've seemed distant," she murmured. "Everything okay, baby?" And God help him, some small, wounded part of Daniel wanted to turn around and beg her to tell him it wasn't true, that he'd misheard, that Marcus was talking about someone else, that the brake line was a coincidence, that the shell company was innocent, that she loved him the way she said she did on that rooftop. "Just wedding stress," he said instead, forcing a smile. "Big week, the biggest," she said, and kissed his cheek. And Daniel gripped the edge of his desk hard enough that his knuckles ached, because it was either that or scream. That night, he called Walter at a.m. "I don't know if I can do this," Daniel admitted, voice raw. "Pretend, smile at her, kiss her. Every day feels like lying to a version of myself that used to believe in something good." Walter's voice, when it came, was gentler than Daniel had ever heard it. "You're not lying, son. You're surviving. There's a difference. And in 11 days, you're going to stand in front of everyone who loves you and expose the truth so completely that she never hurts anyone again. That's not weakness, Daniel. That's the hardest kind of strength there is." Daniel hung up the phone and sat alone in the dark. And for the first time since the rain-soaked night outside Le Chevalier, he allowed himself to cry, not for the wedding, that would never happen the way he'd imagined, but for the man he used to be, who believed the world worked in straight, trustworthy lines. The plan Walter, Sam, and Daniel devised was simple in structure, brutal in execution. They would let Vanessa and Marcus believe everything was proceeding exactly as planned, right up until the moment it wasn't. Sam Okafor, working through a former colleague still on the force, obtained a warrant for a wiretap based on the physical evidence of the tampered brake line and the financial paper trail. Rayesh had compiled evidence strong enough, finally, to move from suspicion to prosecution. 3 days before the wedding, detectives recorded her voice, clear and unmistakable, finalizing details. The accident would occur during Daniel's honeymoon site visit to a bridge project in Vermont, a visit Vanessa herself had suggested 2 weeks earlier, wrapped in the guise of supporting his passion for his work. "Even on our honeymoon, the rental car's already arranged." Marcus's voice crackled through the recording. "Same tech as the truck, mountain roads, hairpin turns, no witnesses for miles. It'll look like exactly what it should look like, a tragic accident." "And the money?" Vanessa asked. "Clean, within 6 weeks. You'll be a very rich, very grieving widow." Sam Okafor slid the transcript across the table to Daniel, with something like grim satisfaction. "We have it, Daniel. All of it. Conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, tampering with a vehicle. She's done. Daniel stared at the transcript, at his fiancée's voice frozen in black ink, discussing his death with the same tone. She used to discuss caterers and flower arrangements. When do we move? He asked. Walter looked at him carefully. That's actually up to you. We can arrest her quietly tonight, before the wedding. Oh, spectacle. Or you let her walk down that aisle tomorrow believing she's won, Walter said, and you stop her yourself, in front of everyone who ever doubted you. So there's no version of the story where anyone whispers that you overreacted, or that you were paranoid, or that you didn't love her enough to give her every chance. Daniel thought of his father, of the phrase he used to say about buildings. You don't just want it standing, son. You want it standing so straight that nobody ever questions the foundation again. Tomorrow, Daniel said quietly, let her walk down that aisle. The church was the same one his grandmother had been baptized in 80 years earlier. White stone, stained glass throwing fractured, rainbows across 200 guests, dressed in their finest, unaware they were about to witness something far more dramatic than vows. Daniel stood at the altar in his father's old cufflinks, his mother in the front row dabbing her eyes, Walter standing rigid near the back beside two plainclothes officers who blended, almost convincingly, in the crowd of wedding guests. Vanessa appeared at the end of the aisle in white lace, radiant, luminous, every inch the bride Daniel had once dreamed of marrying. She smiled at him with an expression so tender, so seemingly full of love, that even now, even knowing everything, Daniel felt his chest ache with the ghost of what he'd believed they had. She reached the altar, took his hands. Her fingers were warm. The officiant began the ceremony, vows exchanged, rings produced. The moment arrived, the traditional pause before, I now pronounce you, and Daniel raised a hand gently. Before we finish, he said, voice steady, carrying clearly through the silent church, I need to say something. Vanessa's smile flickered, just slightly, confusion crossing her face. Daniel, 3 weeks ago, Daniel continued, turning to face the stunned congregation, I disguised myself as a homeless man and sat outside Le Chevalier restaurant. I wanted to understand why my fiancée had secret dinners every Thursday. What I heard changed my life. Gasps rippled through the pews. Vanessa's face drained of color. Daniel, what are you? I heard you tell Marcus Voss that I wouldn't live long enough to sign papers. Daniel said, his voice cracking slightly but not breaking. I heard you discuss a modified brake line on my truck. I heard you plan an accident during our honeymoon in Vermont. And 3 days ago, detectives recorded you confirming all of it. The church erupted into chaos. Gasps. A scream from Vanessa's mother. Guests half rising from their seats. Vanessa grabbed Daniel's hands, her composure shattering into something raw and desperate. Daniel, please, you have this wrong. I would never. Ma'am, Sam Okafor said, stepping forward from the crowd, badge raised. 2 uniformed officers flanking him from the side entrance. Vanessa Price, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and criminal tampering with a motor vehicle. You have the right to remain silent. The officers moved forward. Vanessa's white lace train dragged against the stone floor as she was led, sobbing, protesting, past 200 stunned wedding guests and out the same doors she'd walked through minutes earlier as a radiant bride. In the chaos, Marcus Voss, who had been seated in the 8th row under a false name as a family friend, attempted to slip toward a side exit. He didn't make it past the church steps before 2 more officers, stationed outside precisely for this possibility, took him into custody. Daniel stood alone at the altar, his father's cufflinks catching the stained glass light. The vows he never got to finish hanging unspoken in the stunned silence of the church. The trial, when it came 8 months later, was swift and merciless. The recorded confession, the tampered brake line, the shell company, the financial trail Rajesh had painstakingly assembled. Together, they formed a case so complete that Vanessa's lawyers pursued a plea deal rather than risk a jury. She received 18 years. Marcus Voss, facing the weight of his prior scheme in Connecticut alongside this one, received 22. The Connecticut case was reopened. The widow, still in Portugal, was contacted by investigators. New evidence, drawn from Rayesh's financial mapping of Marcus's shell companies, connected the two cases in ways that finally gave her husband's death the scrutiny it always deserved. Daniel didn't attend the sentencing. He'd said everything he needed to say in that church. Coldwell Structural Group finished the Vermont Bridge project on schedule, under a new site manager, without Daniel ever setting foot in the rental car that had been waiting for him. Impounded now, its tampered brake system entered into evidence as Exhibit 14. A year later, Daniel stood on the same rooftop where he'd proposed. Alone this time, looking out over the city his father had helped build one steel beam at a time. He'd sold the apartment he shared with Vanessa. He'd donated the $4 million insurance policy, increased to a scholarship fund for engineering students from working class families. The kind of kid he used to be. The kind of kid who believed hard work and honesty were enough to build a good life. He still drove the same silver truck, the brake lines replaced with a paranoid triple check that Big Eddie now performed monthly, free of charge, out of something between guilt and loyalty. He still called his mother every Sunday at p.m. He thought, sometimes, about the man in the disguise sitting on that cold pavement, about how the city had walked past him without seeing him, the same way Vanessa had walked past dozens of invisible people every week of her life, never once considering that one of them might be the man she was planning to bury. There's a particular kind of clarity that comes from being made invisible, even briefly. Daniel had spent one rain-soaked evening as nobody, and in becoming nobody, he'd finally seen somebody clearly for the first time. He thought about starting over, about whether he'd ever trust again, ever let someone close enough to hurt him the way Vanessa had. He didn't have an answer yet, but standing on that rooftop, wind pulling at his coat, city lights spreading out beneath him like a field of quiet stars, he understood something his father had tried to tell him his whole life. You don't just want it standing. You want it standing so straight that nobody ever questions the foundation again. He'd survive. He'd rebuild. And next time, if there was a next time, he would make sure the ground beneath him was real, before he ever let himself stand on it with his whole heart again. Because sometimes, the greatest gift a disguise can give you isn't invisibility. It's the truth nobody thought you'd ever hear.